Okay, great. So I'm just going to put this back on the background. So we're pleased to add a new member to the panel, which is Alex Selby-Boothroyd here, who is the head of data journalism at The Economist as well. So he's going to be joining us from the panel, which is good news, I think, because he's going to have a kind of overriding perspective on things. So just as a warm-up question for Alex, this evening we've had quite a few different, well, we've had kind of two sets of stories really. Some was around kind of news, right, which I would probably say some of the stuff around election coverage and stuff. And then some of it's more like magazine articles. So I was just interested in if you could tell us a bit about the difference in process between something that's a bit more of a magazine thing versus what would be a breaking news story.
Thanks for the hard question. I think The Economist sees itself as a newspaper, but it's clearly a magazine. It's a weekly. We do have longer pieces in there, but most of what we cover is news. The biggest difference for us is the speed of turnaround. If something happens on a Tuesday, we can have a story written and published Tuesday night or Wednesday, unless it's a data story. Those take a long time. So for us, we'd rather do the longer data pieces and the shorter sort of news pieces. We don't always get the choice, but that's the biggest difference for us, I think.
And in terms of the kind of, I suppose, commercial pressures, if I want a bit of a phrase, I mean, how does the magazine see the value, the effort that might go into the longer form pieces? I mean, is it appreciated, or is it something you guys have to keep carving out time for?
No, our editor-in-chief is really pushing for more data pieces from us. We've almost doubled the data team in size in the last couple of years, and we have a, what do we call it? Special projects team, which is very equivalent to Sam's visual storytelling team. They want the longer, more, they keep using this word whizzy, which I don't really like, but they want things that move, but they want things that move people, that are, take you into a story, much more than just a photo at the top and a bunch of text. So we're encouraged to do it. The trickiest thing for us, I think, and anyone that works in data knows this, is a fast turnaround data story based on a news event that's just happened. We do them rarely. We don't do them badly, I don't think, but they're so hard to do, to find reliable data and turn it into a chart and a story over a few hours.
Okay, great. That's really interesting. I've got a couple of other questions, but I thought we'd take one from the audience first, and then I can throw mine in if anyone has one. Yep, Paul, you first.
I'm aware of, like, in newspapers or whatever, what the vocabulary of an average Sun reader is, or an average Daily Mail reader, or whatever it is. And that's fairly sort of predictable. But in terms of graphicacy, in terms of what is your expectation of an FT reader, an Economist reader, a graphic detail column reader in The Economist or whatever, how do you gauge it, and is it complete guesswork?
I'll answer and then pass to Sam. We did some market research. We were a bit worried that everyone would say they don't understand our charts at all. Fortunately, they didn't. I think people want us to push them a bit. They're not averse to I think it's called a xenograph, this kind of thing you've never seen before. But if you use the annotation layer well enough, if you have a good, clear takeaway at the top, people know what they're getting into and they spend time reading the chart, they generally thank you for introducing them to something that's a bit different.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think readers have got used to, I mean, the more you spend on something, the more you get out of it, and I think that people are willing to spend time on something if they do think they'll get a lot out of it, and I think interactivity really helps with that. I also think that like visual and data literacy has just gone through the roof post-pandemic. Like you've never had politicians pointing at charts before, talking about flattening the curve, and like that really resonated with the public. And I think that's changed visual data journalism in this country massively, probably globally. And off the back of, like our team probably exists off the back of that. I think that we quantified the impact of visual and data journalism in a way that we never thought that we would. We had so many more stories, so many more charts. John Burr-Murdoch, who's one of our colleagues, just kind of his rise on the back of COVID was all down to his ability to explain the world to people with visuals and data. And then it's about annotations as well. Like, I think one of the key things is, can you guide readers, even through static charts, can you kind of can you kind of tell them the key bits through annotations? And lots of research has been done into where people look at charts, which you can do. And if you understand that and you kind of think about how you convey that, then it works well. The language itself is a really interesting one. I think the FT has a habit of using language which is complicated, and the learning curve can be quite steep. So we've started looking at doing things where we have words that are underlined, where if you click on them, you get an expanded definition, so you cater to both sides of that audience, and that's quite a nice sort of feature for us. But simplifying the language right down and simple sentences is the answer. Like, I always think, if you can write really well for the Daily Mail or the Sun, then you're doing very well to explain complex topics to that audience. And actually, that is a really difficult skill. And I think that making it more complicated is not the answer. So you should be able to write very simple sentences, really, and that brings us off into data journalism too.
Great, thanks. Making things more complicated is kind of what we're very good at here, so it's refreshing to hear that. I had a question, and then we'll take another one off the floor. So I think pretty much, all three of the talks referenced being able to see something from someone else's perspective, right? That isn't necessarily your own. So, we had polling, from a room full of kind of politically engaged people, and the general narrative that, we think the world is more liberal than it may really be, and trying to fight that urge. We've had, making a street in Ukraine relatable, a place you've never visited or been to, and then even trying to suss out the differences in musical tastes from different audiences around the world. So I just was intrigued about whether there was a process that you go through, and kind of like what level you're comfortable with, speaking on behalf of other people effectively to tell a bigger story about them and their lives. So it's quite a bit of a philosophical question, but I thought, should we go? We'll start with Ben first.
Well, is it working? Yep. In polling, it's absolutely, my goodness me. It's just, like I say, the 2016 EU referendum was the big sort of wake-up call to make me realise we don't really realise the country we live in. And for the past 10 years, we have slowly, progressively seen a liberalisation of attitudes, I suppose, particularly when it comes to immigration. But nonetheless, we are still quite pro-restrictions, and you just got to demonstrate that. And the best way to do that is really what I noticed, say 2014-15, is that the coverage of attitudes to immigration are negative, are resentful, are quite. There wasn't much, if any, coverage of it, I have to say, and that's what I noticed, and that's why I set up Britain Elects, really. And it's just one good thing to do about it is to get a whole list of polling questions, 20 questions. Do you support, oppose the rail strikes? If I may just ask, actually, how many of you are in support of the rail strikes going on at the moment? Oh, yeah. Regrettably, you are in a minority. Only 40% of Britons support the rail strikes right now. 45% oppose them. And to be honest, that gap's going to get a little bit wider. In October, thankfully, we got to 45% support, but now it's gone down a little bit. It's just worth looking at yourself in the context of the wider country. And I just think, get 20 poll questions, put them together, get you to do a quiz. Do you support the rail strikes? If you say yes, congratulations. There's only 44% of you in this country. Do you support rejoining the EU? Well, congratulations. I think it's closer to 58% now who support rejoining the EU. I think that kind of stuff, sort of reality check. We need a lot more of it, because while bubbles are incredibly helpful to allow you to hone your arguments, you're not going to be able to properly cover the country if you're forever living in one, I think. Great.
Talking of bubbles, we had some bubbles on the Spotify chart. So, what process did you go through there to kind of reassure yourself that it all kind of made sense, I suppose?
I think that one of the sort of fun things about the Spotify piece was while, you may be listening to, lots of German music or, lots of Korean music, it's very rare. I think you'll find someone who's listening to everything. So what we really did with that piece is take sort of the macro view, and we had a Spanish colleague working on it who So, I listen to a lot of Spanish music, but I didn't realize that, South and Central America was listening to all of the same stuff. And that was a sort of new realization for him. So I think that was one of the ways that we're both, sort of telling individual stories, I guess, but also it's that macro view that very few people will see.
Yeah, and I guess the FT story, I mean, you sent someone there to add that colour to the personal experiences. Great. Okay, have we got another question? There was someone, I think, who had their hand up, and then I cut them off. Let's go with you first, and go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about your background and how you got into working with data and data visualization. Were there any specific bachelor or master courses that you took that opened doors, or was it more sort of self-interest and self-teaching like you mentioned then? I'm just sure many of us as students would love to hear more about your personal experiences.
Well, you're holding the mic, Olivia, so you can go first.
Start. So I really got into data graphics through doing a PhD. I did a PhD here in London at Royal College of Art, which is an art and design school, but they have a design engineering department. And I did a PhD in data visualization for cultural heritage data sets, so like digitized museum collections or art gallery collections. These kinds of institutions have all been digitizing their holdings, and there are these enormous data sets which are very difficult to make sense of, and data visualization is one of the ways that you can, one of the methods for making sense of these collections. So I did this PhD and worked with various different cultural institutions and made a lot of different data viz tools and interfaces, and then I worked on an academic research project as a specialist data viz engineer, which was a big digital history project, again, sort of historical data, but I was sort of very graphics focused, and it was from there I then moved on to The Economist.
Okay, Ben? Sorry, Sam. I've got in my mind, I've
Keeping us on our toes, I like it.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, most of my skills, I'd say, are self-taught. I got my first job in journalism back in 2013, which now makes me feel very old. And that was kind of as a reporter, so it was more, that was for The Guardian. I was kind of reporting, pitching ideas, coming up with stuff I could do. That was a placement to kick off with, and then I printed out little business cards and gave them to all the editors and said, I will come and do anything that you need, which was my mum's idea and I thought was ridiculous, and then actually worked really well. But my plan was always to do a master's if I needed to, but I wanted to just go straight in if I could. My undergraduate was a history degree. And then I kind of realized quite quickly that if you're good with numbers at that point, it would just completely elevate what you could do. I also had a job at a publishing company at the same time, and I taught myself how to create all of their ebooks. So I was then converting books into ebooks with scripts, which then made me the digital editor for a publishing company where I could, just because I had some idea what to do with the books. It was just ridiculous how quickly, if you were good with numbers at that point, you could do stuff. Moved to the Times after that and was kind of the first interactive journalist there, called a news producer at the time, and I just supported other reporters with their ideas and stories. And then the world just came towards me, to be honest, and data journalism just got bigger and bigger, and learning how to visualize stuff from there was good. I did a course in Goldsmiths in R, which was kind of a good booster for those skills, but I really think learning on the job in those situations helps really well. But what I would say in terms of thinking about how to get into this is picking a discipline that you really like and that you want to focus on is a good idea. Increasingly, these teams have people with specific roles that kind of combines to create interdisciplinary work, and unicorns who can do everything. They still exist, and we have them in our teams, but it's much more complicated when you're trying to pull together projects like this if you've got one person who wants to do all of it or who does do all of it, because it's much better when you collaborate. And in our team, we've got Alex is a reporter with a traditional reporting background and works fantastically well in our team, so I'd say that's a key thing.
Great. Well, Alex is the boss, so he can tell you exactly what needs to happen.
I went to university before data journalism existed, I think, so it wasn't really an option for me. I did languages at university, but then I got a job for the EIU, which is the research part of the Economist. I I pretended I could use Excel, and I fell deeply in love with Excel and used it every day. And VBA, so recording yourself doing something, looking at what it's generated as code, and then working out how to tweak it to basically to avoid work, to get the computers through the work. Did that for years. And then when they're setting up the data team at The Economist, someone I'd clearly helped with a spreadsheet problem phoned me up and said, we're setting up this team. Are you interested? I said, not really. And he said, no, are you interested? And I said, oh, I see what you mean. Okay, what do I have to do? And he said, you have to know D3. So I was like searching for it while we were on the phone. I was like, oh yeah, I know D3, this JavaScript package. I had the weekend, I read a book, I tried to learn it. It was really difficult. I got to like midnight on the Sunday night, I had nothing. Got to 3 a.m. and I just got it working. So I sent that on the Monday, I got an interview, and I've sort of been blagging it since. They took me off there and put me in charge of going to meetings, which I don't know if that's a good thing, but it's the self-taught thing that Sam was saying. Find a way of doing something, search Stack Overflow, get it to work for you, and then it shows that you have an ability to search the internet and get things working. That's the most important thing. Get it to work. It doesn't matter how.
Similar to what was said before, absolutely fake it till you make it, really. And as I sit here, students of university doing this course, I do feel hopelessly out of my depth, I regret to say, because I didn't go this route. Everything is self-taught from the get-go to now. I didn't do a course in this at university. The way I got into it, so for those who maybe are active on Twitter, I set up this thing called Britain Elects, which just covers all the polls, council by-elections, where tiny bits of the country you never knew existed actually have an election to replace a councillor. I love covering that. It's a horse race of politics, and we were talking about audiences, knowing your audience. I knew the audience of politics are basically people, it's sport for the nerds. That's what politics is. You are there to support your team. You want to know how well your team is doing. So when you have a simple thing, polls, who's ahead? Oh, my party's ahead. Oh, I'm that far behind. Oh, here's why I need to be worried. That's why you read the audience, and the political audience is the very sporty audience. That's what I think 538 do quite well. They do politics and NBA, and even did the World Cup quite well. It's fascinating, really. But how I learned it all, fake it till I make it. In 2015, I obviously my background is quite political. If it's not obvious, I was roped into working on a campaign on getting young people out to vote in 2015, and on the night I masterminded their HQ's election gathering bit. Basically, I just set up a big spreadsheet. I got a load of people on Twitter to sort of get in touch with me with the results when you get it. We put it in the spreadsheet. We're able to analyze the results, and we know the lines to put out the media immediately. Okay, so we were on top of the media game at that point. And it was at that point, as you were working there, another friend sort of said to me, hey, you should do more of this. And this was in the immediate aftermath of 2015. We were talking about the referendum, the EU referendum campaign. And then I was invited there to help out sort of on some analysis there, sorting out the messaging of how we're going to speak to voters, how we're going to target certain voters. So I was doing that from about 2015 till January 2016, and then I decided to go away because I just fell out of love with London. Sorry, but I then I went to university, spent a few years there, then dropped out because I was very poor. I couldn't really afford much, and then 2019 general election, the snap election. Britain Elects was doing quite well. It was a good brand. It had I don't know how many 100,000 followers. 200. I don't know 300. I can't remember. And the New Statesman sort of got in touch saying, "Hey Ben, we want your traffic." So that's where I am now, put bluntly. But when it comes to learning how to design things, it's just know your audience. Trial and error. I did a lot of things, tweeted it out. Some people say, hey, this could be better, use a map. And I did. And it's good. My audience was very critical, sometimes abusive, but it was good.
On that note, I'll stop you there on the critical point. But I think the interesting thing I would say is that one of the things that students often come to me with, and some of my students are in here and some of the alumni, is they always think there's a perfect answer to a question, and there's always a formula that gets you to that answer. And actually, I think pretty much everyone here has kind of said, well, they started with a problem they needed to solve first, and then they worked out how to solve it, rather than kind of the other way, learning the formula and then trying to find the problem for it. And I think, there's elements of everyone being self-taught here. I mean, I was self-taught my programming skills and everything. That's just because we had problems and stories we were interested in telling and solving. I think that's a big takeaway. I'm conscious of time, and I will give the last question to a former student, and then we'll have a quick brief answer because we need to be out of here by 9 o'clock and there's still stuff at the bar, I guess. So, Yahara, you go first. You have the last question.
So when you're creating your visualizations and your maps, I was wondering to what extent do you feel like you have a responsibility to communicate the uncertainty that's in your data or the subjective choices that you make when you're choosing between what projection to use. So I was wondering to what extent you feel like that's your responsibility and to what extent you feel like the data literacy is there for people to understand it.
Who wants to? We'll have a couple of people answer. Who wants to do that?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, polling uncertainty, and then we'll do...
Yeah, the whole thing about uncertainty is completely relevant to political opinion polling. Okay, so perfect example, again, 2016 EU referendum. For those who don't know, the polls had it 50.5% Remain, 49.5% Leave. Okay, but based on the narratives, based on the academic sort of conclusions, when you listen to academia, everyone was thinking it was going to be a Remain whitewash, and it wasn't really. The polling was really neck and neck, but we never wrote it up that way. If you have something in political opinion polling, you really need to communicate uncertainty, and I'm rapidly discovering that the Economist do it quite well with your Elliot Morris, with his work in communicating the uncertainty of the midterms and the president stuff. You can need to show a margin of error. And this is a science. We are doing a science here. Polling is definitely a science. You may have heard when you look at a poll. Perfect example. Again, if a poll says Remain 51%, you kind of need to assume there's an error there. Okay. So the normal standard poll is a 3 percentage point margin of error. So if you had a poll which says 51% Remain, you can sort of say normally in most, if the poll is healthy, it's good sample size, good pollster, all that kind of stuff. You can assume the actual result is going to be between 54% Remain and 48% Remain, if I get my numbers right. We just need to communicate that better. But annoyingly in journalism, in our pursuit of, those binary certainties, we don't like uncertainty, do we? The markets don't like it. So in journalism, sometimes we're compelled not to give it. So if you put those large uncertainty margins, it kind of clouds your data project annoyingly, which I've definitely found to get in there.
Great, and I'll just whisper to Olivia, see if she wants to answer the question, so I'll get her to answer that in the context of the work that she's been doing, and then we'll wrap things up.
To look at sort of a different view on this, I think with sort of polling data, you often have these, sort of quite explicit sort of uncertainties and margins. But there definitely are cases where there is uncertainty sort of inherent in your data, and you don't want to present more certainty that you have, but you also don't want to make a big deal about it because that's not the main communication of the graphics. So in particular, I'm thinking of a piece that we did earlier this year, which was a historical piece around the US Juneteenth holiday, which commemorates the end of slavery in the US, and it was looking at data around the slave trade and particularly looking at family separation among slaves who were traded within the US. And a historian had created this data set, and she had estimated family separation using surnames because this information was never recorded properly. And so her data had this element of uncertainty in it, of surnames. You'll miss some people who are related, or some people may have the same surname and are not related, but it wasn't the sort of whole story that we wanted to tell with the graphics. So we were thinking about what are ways that we can present this data and not be overly certain about who is related to who, and yet sort of not make that sort of the whole big deal. And we thought, there are ways that you can deal with uncertainty where you want to handle it very subtly, and sort of come up with subtle design strategies. So in this case, I remember we decided not to include any last names when we actually used the names as the data points in this graphic. And this way, nobody could sort of look up and do a sort of family history. And it was just a sort of a subtle way of not wanting to be overly certain. So there's various ways that you can deal with it.
Great, thanks. And that also speaks really nicely to another question I get, which is this right or wrong? And invariably, it's shades of grey, and how you articulate that is important. So I think we'll finish there. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. I've got to thank our speakers for giving up their time to present this evening. I'd like to also thank Alex as well for helping to arrange the speakers and getting this event off the ground with us. Moira's not here, but she would have checked you in and is the Institute Manager for the Social Data Institute, and so she's done a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff, and we've also had some brilliant student helpers who have helped, and UCL Catering for breaking their card reader, which means I think it's on, drinks are on me still. So if anyone wants to grab one on the way and have a quick chat with speakers or amongst friends, that's absolutely great. But just to be clear, we're not allowed to do lock-ins here, and so you will be thrown out at 9 o'clock. Thanks a lot, everyone.